My name is Marco, and my job is writing tourist guides. It's a job that I like. I like discovering new places, getting to know their colors, their tastes, the people who live there. I like setting off. And today I'm setting off for the Abruzzi. I have to write a historical and cultural guide to the area between the Trigno and Sinello rivers in the province of Chieri. I've never been, which is why I can't wait to get there. My journey starts here, from the mountains where the river Sinello rises, from the villages that make up the Alto Vastese, that overlook its valley, 8 communes rich in history and traditions. Traditions like that of the stonecutters, craftsmen who, from the Middle Ages onwards, Raffaelle's grandfather was the last practitioner of this art, which here in Castiglione Messer Marino can be seen in the 19th century fountains of the Madonna della Grazia in San Rocco and in the beautiful portal of the Church of the Archangel Michael. Traditions that bring together religion and peasant customs every year on the feast of San Clementine, which brings numerous pilgrims to Castelguidone, because apart from paintings, reliquaries, and medieval wooden statues, the saint's body is kept here as well. But the history of this territory is one whose testimony takes us much further back than the Middle Ages, as shown by the holy area of the Italic temples of Schiavi d'Abruzzo, where I go with the historian Pasquale.
Questi sono 2 templi sannitico-italici.
Pasquale explains to me that the greater temple is from the 2nd century BC, while the lesser temple, rebuilt on the surviving ruins in the early 70s, is from the 2nd century AD. He also tells me that the greater temple is a religious military temple.
Gli eserciti di tutte le tribù sannitiche si concentravano qui per le ritualizzazioni religiose e per la preparazione alla guerra.
And to spot the enemy, they made use of the numerous towers spread throughout the territory in the eras that followed, like the Torre della Fara, in the valley dominated by the village of Celenza sul Trigno. Today, instead, it houses a large colony of rooks. I climbed up to the village to visit the sanctuary of San Donato, which is still a place of pilgrimage. These great wooden scales preserved in the sanctuary were used to estimate the payment to be made to the saint in exchange for curing epilepsy by placing on one side the same weight and grain as the sick person on the other. Apart from the scales, the church also contains a beautiful 16th century polyptych. They are valleys overlooked by medieval villages that sprung up on these hills because they dominated the territory, inaccessible to their enemies. Highest of all, at 1,145 meters above sea level, was Rocca Vecchia, above Rocca Spinalvedi, abandoned in the 19th century by its inhabitants because of its inaccessibility. Palmoli, then, stands out at a distance for its castle. It is also notable for its Museum of Country Living, where, alongside everyday objects, we can find others that were used for family entertainment. These are objects tied to a countryside tradition that has still not been erased by modern times. In all these years, I have learned that if you really want to know the village you are visiting and the nature of those who live there, you have to go to a bar. And to judge by what I find there, the atmosphere is so relaxed and friendly I cannot help but join them for a game of cards. But apart from the hospitality of its people, Torre Bruna is also worth visiting to see the area of Guardia Bruna with its baronial palace clinging to a rocky spur. Just as evocative is the Church of St. John the Baptist, in the highest part of Carunchio. From here you can take in a splendid view. The portal of the church and the grandiose organ inside it are both from the 18th century. On the other hand, the Purgatory Church is medieval, and it contains some particularly beautiful 15th century frescoes. I am struck by the atmosphere in these churches. I am struck too by the atmosphere at the Mater Domini Sanctuary in Fraine, where I meet Don François.
Io sono Don François, sono della nazionalità ruandese, sto a Fraine in questo santuario quasi 3 anni
According to a tradition, the church was built to thank the Virgin Mary, who appeared to a deaf-mute separatist girl, who by miracle regained her hearing and speech following this vision. Heading towards the sea, the impetus of the water diminishes, and the Sinello, Treste, and Trigno proceed peacefully through the hills. They pass through uncontaminated spots, isolated and harsh, which in the past attracted religious communities looking for God. And it is on the banks of the Treste that the sanctuary of the Archangel Michael rises near Liscia. The small cave inside it is at the center of the legend that tells of a herdsman who, following a young bullock that disappeared every day, found it kneeling at the spring in front of the Archangel Michael. The sanctuary of the Madonna della Grazia in Monte Odorisio is also linked to water. It was built in 1886 after, during restoration works, a spring burst forth whose water cures the sick. Since then, the water has gathered in a pool that is visited by pilgrims. The sanctuary also contains a number of late 19th century ex-votos, one of which describes an exorcism. Moving up towards the center of the town, you come across the Tower of the Celestines, the only evidence of a destroyed Benedictine monastery, and the castle at the highest point in the village that still maintains its early 16th century features. Immersed in the green, just outside the village of San Buono, lies the convent of St. Anthony, which, in some of its rooms, houses the Vastese Museum of Art and Archaeology. Here I meet Rosalinda and her smile. She is my guide to the finds that are displayed here. Funerary decorations, ornaments in bronze and votive material with inscriptions in Osco, finds of notable interest and largely unseen before. Another place of worship in these valleys is the little church of the Madonna delle Grazie, at the feet of the Fresa Grandinaria, where I stopped to see the 15th century gilded statue of the Madonna and Child. Approaching the sea, the landscape changes and man's hand becomes evident. These fertile lands have attracted men since ancient times, as demonstrated by the Quadrilatero Archaeological Park in the heart of the historic center of San Salvo, just over 5 kilometers from the sea. Davide, a professor and historian, explains that the park was born at the end of the 90s to accompany the digs that took place from 1997 to 2006.
Sono usciti resti di un insediamento romano che può essere considerato una sorta di piccola città. Tra questi si segnalano il mosaico policromo molto bello e comunque ci sono diverse testimonianze che sottolineano la grandezza e la ricchezza di questo sito che poi è stato rioccupato e riutilizzato nel Medioevo da questa abbazia cistercense. Questi monaci cistercensi che riescono a mettere assieme possedimenti che vanno dalla provincia dell'Aquila fin giù al Tauliere di Puglia, quindi la provincia di Foggia.
And visible traces of this period remain in the Church of St. Joseph, then annexed to the monastery, whose facade, on the other hand, was rebuilt in the 1960s. And continuing towards the western side of the square, I find the Porta della Terra, the Earth Gate, so called because it led to the countryside. And it was during the rebuilding works on the gate that the first Roman remains were found that can still be seen along with other finds in the Porta della Terra Civic Museum. Not far from the Civic Museum, there is another very original museum, the Merry-Go-Round of Memory, run by Angiolina.
Questo posto l'ho chiamato non a caso la giostra della memoria per non dare l'idea di un museo noioso. Giostra come la giostra dei bambini, in pratica è la realizzazione di un sogno che dura tutta la vita, perché io da piccola ho sempre sognato di conservare tutte le cose vecchie, le cose per esempio della nonna.
In the medicine room, for example, you can learn about the therapeutic uses of rosemary. And that of the trousseau, you can imagine women sewing linen for their daughters. And on what remains of plates and tankards, you can imagine the sites of transhumanists that passed near here along the cattle track that went from the Abruzzi to Puglia. I leave San Salvo to go to Casal Bordino, to the famous sanctuary of Our Lady of the Miracles that rose here following an apparition of the Blessed Virgin and has been a center of pilgrimage for centuries. It is Don Paolo, the prior of the Benedictine monastery, that rises next to the sanctuary, who tells me the story of this miraculous apparition.
Ci fu una tempesta che distrusse i raccolti di tutta questa zona, per cui il giorno successivo questo anziano contadino si era incamminato di buon mattino per venire a constatare i danni subiti dal suo campo di grano. Sentì la campana di Casal Bordino, si prostrò in adorazione sul fango, chiese perdono al Signore dei suoi peccati e ci fu in quel momento una grande luce che lo avvolse e la Vergine che apparve e gli disse: non ti preoccupare mio devoto, il tuo campo di grano lo troverai intatto, però tornando al paese va dal tuo parroco, digli che solleciti i fedeli ad osservare il terzo comandamento e ricordarsi di santificare le feste. La Madonna scomparve, il luogo dove aveva posato i piedi restò asciutto, l'anziano si diresse verso il suo campo, lo trovò intatto, tornò al paese, si diffuse la notizia, iniziarono tantissimi pellegrinaggi, raccorrere di fedeli, numerosi segni, guarigioni, miracoli, per cui il popolo iniziò a invocare la Vergine in questo luogo da subito come la Madonna dei miracoli.
The sanctuary was built in 1962 on the ruins of previous churches, the 19th century one in the shape of a Greek cross, and the 17th century one whose grandiose fresco of the apparition is conserved here. Since 1925, with the birth of the monastery, the faithful have been welcomed by the Benedictine monks. The sanctuary also houses a library that contains 70,000 modern books and 5,000 valuable volumes, including an illuminated antiphonary from the 16th century. And there are also a number of really beautiful ex-votos conserved in the annexes of the crypt.
Sono dei piccoli quadretti che rappresentano la scena del miracolo, di ammalati, salvati, chi è caduto da cavallo, chi ha incontrato i briganti e si è salvato invocando la Vergine.
You don't have to be a believer to visit the sanctuary. You can come to see these ex-votos and the frescoes, to consult a book in the library, or simply just
Dare un po' tempo anche a te stesso.
And after having done so, I continue in the direction of Vasto, which with its 40,000 inhabitants is the biggest city in this stretch of the Abruzzi. According to legend, it was Diomedes, returning from the Trojan War, who founded the city, probably on the plain of Punta Penna, not far from here. That is where the Frentani city of Histonium stood, which in 89 BC the Romans moved to its present location. Conquered first by the Lombards and then by the Franks, it lost its original name, becoming Guasto Daimone. The church of this medieval village was St. Mary Major, dominated on the outside by the bell tower, partly rebuilt in 1715. Inside it houses the tombs of noble families, especially that of the Davalos, who from 1496, for a full 3 centuries, were the lords of Vasto. And the reliquary of the Sacred Thorn, donated by Pius IV to Ferrante Francesco Davalos halfway through the 16th century. In 1645, a Turkish slave saved it from a fire, obtaining in exchange his freedom and popular acclaim. From here I arrive in Piazza Rossetti, the city's main square, dedicated to the Risorgimento poet Gabriele Rossetti. The square is enclosed by an imposing medieval fortress, altered halfway through the 15th century by a powerful mercenary commander, Giacomo Caldora, who gave his name to the fortress, Castello Caldoresco. And it was Caldora again who built the palace that would become the residence of the Davalos. Of Caldora's time, there were traces both inside and outside, even though the 16th century stamp left by the powerful Spanish family is the more evident today. And inside the Davalos Palace, in the Neapolitan garden, that I meet Daniela.
Questo è il giardino napoletano di Palazzo Davalos, è molto interessante, pieno di piante che ricordano proprio il clima mediterraneo, quindi gli aranci, i nespoli, dei bellissimi fiori, naturalmente i gerani, abbiamo anche piante di rosmarino. Il Palazzo Davalos è un palazzo che possiamo dire incapsulato perché ha delle pareti inserite all'interno di epoca successiva rispetto alla fondazione, ha subito gli attacchi dei Saraceni ed è soprattutto la sede dei musei civici di Vasto. Dentro al piano terra si può visitare il museo archeologico, quindi con importanti testimonianze preromane e romane. Al piano superiore ci sono invece le pinacoteche, quindi quadri dell'Ottocento, ma anche collezioni di arte contemporanea.
The picture gallery is home to the works of some of Vasto's most important artists, above all the Palizzi brothers, in particular Giuseppe and Filippo, the first to give a verist direction to Italian painting of the 1800s. And alongside these works in the Gallery of Modern Art, the works of 20th century artists donated to the city by the Paglione family. Inside the palace I also find the Costume Museum. In these rooms, faced by these clothes, I really feel as though I were in another era. Not far from the Davalos Palace is St. Joseph's, at one time the church of the medieval convent of the Augustinians, and since 1853 the Cathedral of Vasto. The interior was redone in Gothic style between the end of the 19th century and the start of the 20th, and it contains a wooden triptych painted in 1505 by Michele Greco da Valona. Another interesting church is the 18th century Madonna del Carmine, decorated with stucco work and paintings from that era. A few more steps and I arrive at Via Adriatica and the Ambling Lodge. From the name of Austrian noble who came here in the suite of the Davalos family. From here you can enjoy the most beautiful view of the city. And further on below, Via Adriatica, the archaeological walk, unfolds in parallel and leads me to the remains of the Church of St. Peter, destroyed in the landslide that struck the city in 1956. St. Peter's, born on the site of a 1st century AD temple, was an important place of worship in the early Middle Ages. Continuing along, I reach the archaeological park of the Roman Baths and its magnificent mosaics that represent real and imaginary marine animals and the triumph of Neptune surrounded by tritons and nereids riding dragons and seahorses. A fantasy sea just a few steps from the real one, in front of which my journey ends. I visited places rich in history and culture. I saw beautiful things and met welcoming, knowledgeable people who took me for a wonderful trip through time. I will write all this in my guide. But above all, I will write that whoever comes to the Abruzzi, to this area between the rivers Trigno and Sinello, cannot but feel love at first visit.